I'm Angela Rogers. I'm the Vice President for Programming with the Pittsburgh chapter of ATD, and so happy to be partnering with ATD Eastern Pennsylvania and ATD Philadelphia to present this Executive Education Speaker Series. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for tonight. At the top of the list is Dr. William J. Rothwell, President of Rothwell Associates and a Professor of Workforce Education and Development at Penn State University Park Campus. As a professor, he heads up a top-ranked program in learning and performance. As a consultant, he travels the world presenting on his 115 published books. In 2012, he was honored with ATD's Distinguished Contribution to Workplace Learning and Performance Award. And in 2013, he was again honored by the ATD Certification Institute by being appointed a Certified Professional in Learning and Performance Fellow. And I'm privileged to have been taught by Dr. Rothwell in several courses. Dr. Angela L.M. Stopper is the Chief Learning Officer and Director of People and Organization Development at the University of California, Berkeley. She leads the team responsible for the creation and delivery of campus-wide initiatives supporting all learning efforts for the campus's 9,000 staff, faculty, and administrators, as well as organization development efforts ensuring the campus is prepared and has the workplace in place to be successful today and in the future. Dr. Stopper is also a faculty member with Penn State World Campus, where she teaches a course for the online Master of Professional Studies degree in Organization, Development, and Change. Jennifer Horner leads multiple functions at ATD, including governance, the association's awards programs, research, customer service, ATD's Certification Institute, and a special offering for enterprises called the ATD Forum. She started at the then ASTD in 1999 and led its public relations work. As a volunteer, Jennifer served on the executive board for the International Association of Business Communicators and was president of the DC chapter. She holds IABC's Accredited Business Communicator credential. And finally, Dr. Aileen Zaballero is a senior partner with Rothwell and Associates and a certified professional in talent development, the CPTD credential, since 2009. She helped develop the competency model and career map for the advanced commercial building workforce and redesigned a performance management system for a senior living community. Aileen recently co-authored Increasing Learning and Development's Impact through Accreditation. So welcome our Rothwell and Associates.
Thank you, Angela. So before we get started, we would like to get to know a little bit about you. We are going to post a quick poll on here. So Zach, can you put the poll up? Just wanted to know a little bit about all of you. If you can kind of share how long you've been in the talent development field. So if you can just share how long you've been in it, maybe you've been in it for 25 plus years, maybe 10 to 24, less than 10. You may be new to talent development. Let's see, looks like we got a good portion over here where a lot of you are 25 and plus years, more years in the field. So we may be asking you some questions about our framework. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get forward. Let me share with you a little bit about what we're doing. In this session, it's still going on, the poll. Okay, so we have here, looks like we have 4 people are 25 years more. We have 3 who are 10 to 24 years. And then we have about 4 people who are 1 to 10 years. So this session, we're going to focus on aligning your talent development components with your business needs. That's a really important piece. You'll probably have heard before in the past how a lot of times what T&D is doing does not align with what organizations are trying to do. And so we're here to help and support all of you to be able to get that done. So first, our framework is an iterative process. As you can see, it is a circle. So we have it where and the first part and most important piece is to prioritize, to ensure that your strategy meets the strategic business objectives. Next, Dr. Stopper will then present the tools to revisioning and aligning you and your team's success. Jennifer will then focus on launching your framework to move you forward and move your organization forward. And then Dr. Rothwell will talk about some of the importance of creating a communication strategy and the value of celebrating your successes and your accomplishments. He will then also focus on examining your results through an evaluation and how your framework, or excuse me, how our framework emphasizes the need to recalibrate and wrap back to the prioritization. We will also share with you several tools. These tools can be used to help you create an action plan. And one of these tools is going to be an online tool that was created by ATD based on the RNA research that we have done. So at the end of the session, we will open up for Q&A. In the chat box, you can see on there, you'll have a chat box that you can actually ask some questions. So feel free to enter those questions in there as we're going forward, but we will go over them at the end to make sure that you are all, that we get over through all of our content. So prioritization. So why do we prioritize? Oh, I am so sorry about that. I apologize. So why do we prioritize? Well, first, it directs our focus on what we want to look at. Have you ever had a really busy, crazy week? As much as we want to, most of the time, we can't get everything done that we want to get done. So we prioritize. And organizations and your senior leaders will also demonstrate what they prioritize based on how they allocate their resources. That's also why it's really important. So therefore, we are going to focus on that as one of the most important pieces. So the prioritization is a conversation that allows your organization to be able to have a common language. You will, your talent development strategy needs to be aligned to your business needs, but as you're doing that, you're also creating an alignment with how you're using these terms and languaging and being able to get everybody on the same page. These conversations will allow you to position yourself so that you're also able to build the capability that's needed in your organization. It'll also ensure that your organization can adapt quickly as needs change, and also make sure that you have the right talent in the right place to be able to achieve success. So before we move forward, I'm going to share with you the TD tool, the talent development tool that was created by ATD. This is a short video to give you an overview of that framework.
The workplace has always been changing, and the talent development field has been changing too. We wanted to pin down how organizations are learning these days in the real world. So we looked around, we did the research, and we created a new way to think about talent development. We learned that most companies have about 15 primary components. Some might focus on fostering innovation. Others might want to make sure their talent can grow within the company. But every organization develops employees differently. And ATD's framework helps you identify your most important components. Then you can adapt quickly as needs change. There's not just one way to think about talent development. There's many. What's your framework look like? Find out at td.org.
So let me show you how this tool is used. If you log in, there's a link down here and below, which is the puzzle.td.org. If you're familiar with QR codes, you could also scan and use this QR code to get to it as well. When you log on, it'll click on it and you'll be asked to create an account or to sign in. Now, this tool is free for everyone. You don't have to be an ATD member, although we do recommend that you are a member. It's a really great organization to be part of, as most of you are, but it's free. It doesn't cost anything. And then you'll sign in and it'll ask you to create your own puzzle. And then when you create a puzzle, you can enter in the name of the puzzle, which a lot of times people will just use the name of the company or the department. And you can even personalize it even more by creating and adding your logo. But where the real part of this tool is that you're allowed to look at these components, and you'll drag and drop the component, and it'll ask you to select whether or not that component is considered a primary, a secondary, or if it's not applicable to your framework. Once you do that, you'll also be able to click on it and see the definitions. Now we have a handout here. Angela is going to put it in the chat box. So if you click on your chat box, you will see a link on there, and it'll give you access to the handout. Now, this is one of the 4 handouts that we're going to be handing out and giving to you tonight. This handout will go over some of the ways to be able to create this TD framework. Now, the first step in regards to prioritizing, how do you prioritize? These steps will help you look at your organization. So the first step is to identify and list your organization's priorities. For example, it might be to create or launch a new product line, or it might be that you're looking to increase customer retention. Whatever the business priorities are, it's important for you to keep that in mind and consider that as you develop your framework. The second step is to name your primary components. Which one of these components are going to help and support the organization and are going to be the most important to you and your department? So if we're taking that example of creating and launching a new product, the components that you might find that are important would be fostering innovation. Why? So you can give employees the freedom to be creative. Another component might be talent acquisition. It's important to have the right people, the right talent in the right place for the new product. Or one of the components might be the sales engagement. So you can promote sales of this new product. The next step is to list the secondary components. So the primary components are the ones that you know are going to be critical and important to ensuring these goals. The secondary are also components that you think are also important, but it may not be the top list. And so it could be instructional design. So creating new training for a new product line. Maybe if you're in the medical field, so compliance might be a primary, or it could be a secondary where regulations becomes an important piece as well, or new technologies as new tools get launched and delivered. The next step, if you have your handout open, but you can see, is that now you start looking at the rest of the components that you did not have. So you've already put in the primary and the secondary, and then you may have 10 or 15 components left. And you'll determine whether or not they're nice to have or whether or not they're important to have. So the question you'll ask yourself is, do I remove this, or is it part of the framework that I need to have? And then the last is that you're going to revisit and you're going to look at the entire framework overall as a whole and see if that aligns with achieving your business or goals. And now I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Stopper, and she's going to talk about the second part of the component of our framework, which is revisioning. Angela?
Great, thanks so much, Lean. You know, as Lean talked about, there's so many things that you can be spending your time on. Being able to prioritize those components that are going to move your organization forward are really, really important. And so that's what that tool allows you to do. It allows you to really strategically look at each of those components and think, which one of these is going to align to help my organization be successful? And also in that vein, we want to talk to you a little bit about how you, as a talent development leader, can revision your talent development function to be robust organization-wide, you know, really build a framework that's going to align your business and your team for success. And so the strategic model that we want to share with you to that end on the next slide is something that was created by a mentor of mine, Dr. Albert Vasiri, who works at Penn State. And it's a strategic leadership framework. In this framework, which is pretty simple, it starts by looking out. So it forces you as a leader to get out from your perspective within your organization and to like look out, to see what's going on out in the world as you're starting to make strategic decisions. Then to look around you to see what's happening within your scope of influence, to look in the mirror, to look what's happening in your organization, And then you start looking to the team and looking for results. So that link there will give you, it's about a 6-minute video that will really discuss this model in depth. So you can think about it when you're thinking strategically about building your framework. But what we wanted to do was just kind of use this as a base to talk about how you might start to revision your talent function. So as we looked out, thinking about kind of the landscape of talent development, here's some of the trends that we saw that we think are really going to impact how we need to be thinking about talent development in the future. You know, that need for centralized communication, upskilling, taking a front seat to things right now because the world is changing so fast, focusing on soft skills becoming more and more important. You know, I saw a statistic the other day that in 2019, the most used courses in Coursera were mostly kind of hard skill development, programming, data analytics, those kind of things. 2020, the top 5 or 6 programs that were being picked on Coursera were all soft skills development. I think they had like 80 million people looking for soft skill development. This is something that's really important in our industry, but you know, getting a sense of these workforce trends is really important as you're thinking about building your strategy. The second step is that after you look out and see what's happening in the workforce, you kind of look around. And so when we look around and some of those universal truths that live in the talent development world, some of the things that we saw were, you know, we all have limited funds. You know, we need to manage our budgets without sacrificing innovation and impact. We need to support our organization's goals and priorities with what we do. And so that's what brought us to come to talk to you today about some of these tools that can help you to do that. So after you look out, you look around, you look in the mirror. And when you start looking in the mirror, thinking about what you as an organization need to do to be successful, these were some of the things that I saw when I looked in the mirror as the Chief Learning Officer at UC Berkeley. I had to do all these things and meet all the needs of what I was seeing by looking out and looking around, but I had to do it on a budget. I thought that I needed to do it by curating learning that's practical and inspiring. You know, I needed to build upon policy and practices that created that kind of learning culture within my organization. And I think hopefully some of this might resonate with you as you're looking at what you want to do. You know, some of these look in the mirror insights might be resonating with you now. And so the question that I pose after we kind of looked out, looked around and looked in the mirror is, do you have the right kind of strategy to make to impact these things that you're seeing? And you know that as a talent development professional, I saw in the poll that we did, most of you have been in the business for at least 10 years. One of the things that we talk about a lot in talent development is the 70-20-10 model. So 70-20-10, which is described on the next slide, really talks about, oops, sorry, that's okay. It really talks about the framework that a lot of us use to set up our talent development functions. And you know, it says 10% of how humans learn about on the job is formal, 20% is social, 70% is experiential or informal. And what I'd like to ask you is just to think about, when you look at this model, what does it say to you? And we actually asked this to an audience of ATD members. I think we asked over 1,000 people, what does 70-20-10 really say to you? And what we learned through research was that this really talks about kind of what we're pushing out to the world. We're pushing out formal learning. We're pushing out social learning. And what we noticed when we did our look out, look around, look in the mirror evaluation is that we should be thinking much more about what it is that our clients need, thinking about our client experience. And so we would like to propose, instead of thinking about everything that we do through a 70-20-10 model, there may be another way for you to think about how you're developing your talent development function. And that's what a model that I created that we like to call the You, Me, We learning model. So in the You, Me, We learning model, and again, there's some links here on your slide so you can really dig deep if you want to learn more about this. But the basics of it is, it's really focused around our learners. So the middle of the You, Me, We learning model is me learning. That's creating a space where you have self-directed learners, empowered learners who are owning their learning journey and kind of going out and finding the learning that they need to be successful. There's also you learning. So now again, remember, this is looking at the world through the eyes of our clients. So when we say you learning, that's our clients looking to you, the learning development function within the organization, to provide them with learning opportunities that are going to help them to grow and be successful. And on the other side, the we learning, meaning they're going to look to their social network to also provide them learning opportunities to be successful. So through this you, me, we lens of learning, we think if you kind of flip your thinking and start thinking about what products and opportunities are you putting out in the you space, in the me space, in the we space, it can really kind of invigorate how we're thinking about learning and development within the organizations. And so what we've done on the next couple of slides is look at the framework that Lean just talked to you about and look at those components. And then started to think about, if I was going to build a talent development framework, talent development structure, I want to make sure that I have some you learning in it. I want to make sure I have some we learning in it. I want to make sure I have some me learning in it. And so we started to kind of section out which of the components are natural fits for some of the learning. So just remember, as you're thinking about you learning, what we're talking about is learning that the organization is putting out to the workforce to help them be successful. And there's some of the components that we think make a real natural fit for that. On the next slide, you'll see me learning. Remember, this is learning that your organization workforce seeks out, so that the empowered individuals are seeking out. They're using their time and their energy to put those learning into their workflow so that they can learn and grow. There's some natural fit components there that you can support as the talent development function in that space as well. And lastly, in the we learning space, creating those personal social learning networks within your organization, creating safe space for those kind of things to happen can be something that you can do also that's going to impact the learning for the folks within your organization. Now on the next slide, we kind of give you another handout that Jennifer's going to put in the chat box for me that's going to allow you to, after you kind of do that prioritization work that Lean talked about, you'll be able to use this worksheet to really take a look at your portfolio and make sure that you have the innovative programs and products within that portfolio that are going to support your business objectives through your primary and secondary components. So when you take a look at that worksheet, you'll see, and that's on the next slide, please. You'll see we ask you to think about your primary component that you just pulled off of the first sheet. So again, maybe that primary component is fostering innovation. Think about your program and products that you have in your portfolio. You know, one of the things that we do at Berkeley is after went through this exercise, we started sponsoring communities of practice. So communities of practice were around campus and they were just kind of, doing their thing. And we said, we want to foster innovation. These communities of practice are here. What a beautiful mechanism for we learning. We should start sponsoring those. We started thinking about mastermind forums, creating other social learning spaces to bring people together to help support that fostering innovation primary component. We started thinking about lunch and learn series. So a series that we could provide out of my shop with my subject matter experts, bringing learning to the people of the organization. And that's really kind of that you learning space. So as you think about your products, as you think about what you're putting forward, we'd love to offer some time for you to, in the chat box, share a little bit about some of those innovative products or programs that you're putting forward now, and how you might link those to a primary or a secondary component of your model. If anybody would like to kind of share in the chat box some of the innovative products or programs that you have, we'd love to just take a moment to think about that and how they might align. So I think we have a question here. On the job training as part of the 70-20-10. So on the job training is really part of that, yeah. In the 70-20-10 model, they call that the informal learning space. In the you, me, we model, that's probably the me learning. So people, going out and seeking that on the job training. I love that idea, supervisor book clubs. like creating that space for people to get together and talk through different books? Do you use, you know, some nonfiction to get people talking and sharing and building upon their ideas? We actually do something similar. We kind of have a book club idea that we do where we provide little discussion guides. So we'll recommend a book and have a little discussion guide that we provide out to people to help them do some of those book club ideas. Peer coaching is huge right now. I think coaching is a wonderful program that we can support within talent development that is just huge and impactful. VP roundtables, vice president roundtables, very, very important. Again, a lot of those are kind of either that me learning that's bringing people together into safe space. I think really powerful ways to be thinking about that. So this again is just another worksheet to help you kind of think through, do you have a well-rounded strategy, and how do you have programs and products that are aligning with those components that you've listed in the previous exercise. So kind of with that is our little bit of a base to move on from. I think it's now, I'll turn it over to Jennifer, who will talk to you a little bit about the next step, which is the launch step.
Great, thanks, Angela. Nice to talk with everyone today. So as you're thinking about how to put this into practice in your own organization, we've got a couple more tools that I'll discuss with you. And I thought this next quote from Arthur Ashe is just really poignant and something that I think is helpful for all of us, particularly in this last year. We're going to talk a little bit more about the talent development framework and the puzzle, but I also don't want it to overwhelm everybody. And I just think this quote is just really great, is start where you are. So as you think about, if you were to consider, a clean slate, or you were to consider sort of baselining your talent development function, how would you want to prioritize that? When Lean and Angela and Dr. Rothwell and I do this presentation, either virtually or at ATD conferences in past years, one of the most interesting things that comes out of these discussions is that a lot of your peers who hear this discussion from us always say, this is such a great tool, whether it's the tactile puzzles that we've used, the physical puzzles, or the online tool that you have access to. People really use it as a way to not only talk to their senior leaders or their peers in the organization about sort of what is our training, learning, talent development, whatever you call it, like what do we do? What are the priorities of our, as Angela calls it, your shop, but like, what are we supposed to be doing? And really, what is our sort of charter? But the other side, and I think this quote is very, very impactful, is don't let that part overwhelm you. Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And I think that is the message that we like to get across to you today, which is, if you were looking at this about what you, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, what you are doing. And also, I think in the last year, a lot of us, and I'm sure you can relate to this, have also taken on a lot. It's been a very additive year. Not only have, I'm sure, a lot of you been asked to do so much more, not only just with transitioning your programs online, but really sort of putting up that softball glove and having to catch softballs every 10 seconds in terms of what your organization needs. If you can step back for a few minutes and say, well, really, how do we want to prioritize our work? This tool, this TD framework, is a great way to do that. And Lean kind of gave you a flavor of that at the beginning to say, what's primary? What is really important that our organization must do? What are some of those secondary things that we also do? And what are the things that we don't do that either is covered by another department or it's just not a priority for us right now? So we kind of give you that context as a way to think about how to continue doing these exercises. So with that, we'll go on to the next slide. If we could look to the team. So this is kind of branching off of what Angela said. So looking in, looking out, looking at ourselves, but also looking to your team. So one way to start doing this, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, is to revisit your programs and your products and to think about what are those things that you're doing now? What are the existing programs and products you have? What's also new, particularly during this unique last year? What are the things that are new that you're doing that you've either taken on or that are, have kind of morphed over this last year? And we're going to show you in a minute through another helpful worksheet that we have. And for each of those new items, what is the input? And we'll talk about that. Really important. What's the level of input that your talent development function and your team needs to have? The impact, and then of course, what are the budget, necessities? Does it have, is it nothing? Does it cost you nothing to do it? Or does it have a high budget? And then the last two steps are to assign accountability and timelines. And one of the things that is going to be so helpful in this next slide that we'll look at is two parts of our worksheet number 3. And we'll show you first part of it is right here. And then the next part of it is really this 4-box model to really help, again, more prioritization. So for example, defining what are the things, the components that exist today and what is new. So what are those things that you're doing and what are those things that you need to be doing that are new or that frankly have been additive to your portfolio or your team's portfolio during these last several years or particularly in this last year. And then, and we'll talk about this in a moment, determine that input and that impact. So is it a large amount of input, meaning a large amount of work from your team, or is it a low amount of input in your team? And then how much of an impact is it having on your workforce and on your organization? High impact, low impact. And then of course, necessary, determining your budget. How much do these things cost? Who's accountable for them? And particularly if they're new items, what's the timeline needed to roll them out? So let's give you some examples on the next slide of how this would actually look. And we're going to continue rolling through some of Angela's examples at UC Berkeley. So for example, if, one of the things that Angela has done is to sponsor a community of practice. They were already existing on campus. They were already part of kind of the culture. Angela, through some research and through some conversations, determined that her group was going to sponsor those communities of practice. So those were existing. Budget, it was sort of a TBD type of situation. There's accountability. There's someone who's sort of going to lead that effort. And when was the launch date? So this is a worksheet that we've got that you can see here that you've got access to, that you can look at, and will help you kind of think through this. And then another item that was new was the Lunch and Learn series. And we'll talk about the impact and the input in a minute of that. So face-to-face and virtual, they were new. What was the budget money? Who's accountable for it? And when is that going to launch, or when is that going to actually happen? So that's the first part. That's page 1 of handout or worksheet 3 that we've got for you. And on the next slide, and this is really where I think really the meat and the fun, but also the impactful work of your impact is really going to come. And that is the impact versus the input. And this is where I think spend some time on this, because it'll really help you determine, is it low input, meaning is it, not a ton of work, not a ton of extra effort, but has a high impact for your employees or for your organization or your clients? That's truly the sweet spot in this 4-grid model. Something's having a low impact. It's really good to try and plot those activities here, and probably a good exercise to do with your direct reports, your entire team. And just to give you an example, this is examples of where things might plot out of the types of activities that you're doing. But where's the sweet spot? What's having a high impact and low input? And it might be for your organization that it might have high input and high impact, and that's okay for your organization. That's important to you, but really determine where is that sweet spot for you for all the activities. Because as we talked about at the beginning, Lean has talked about this, Angela talked about this, resources are not infinite. Time is not infinite either. So I think that's probably what I would leave you with is, what are the most important components and most important activities that both align to what the organization and the employees or your clients need, but also activities that are going to help move you forward. So in the worksheet that you've got access to, and all of these are open, by the way, we've been putting them in the chat. Somebody just asked the question, how do you determine impact? I think that's really going to be likely, it's going to be based on what is impactful for your organization. Dr. Rothwell is going to talk a little bit about how you might do a couple of those things in terms of impact, but I would also say use some of the things that we talk about today, but it's also going to be, how do you measure impact? How do you measure results in your organization? So that's a great segue, Angela Rogers. Thank you. For me to turn it over to Dr. Rothwell to take us home today.
Okay, so as we implement our talent development framework, we have to remember to continuously communicate about it. One of the fundamental mistakes that's made with these long-term strategic change efforts, like the implementation of the talent development framework, is that there may be a lot of hoopla at the beginning. We might take our C-suite executives off-site if we're able to convince them to do it and do the hands-on version of the framework. Or we may be able to use the virtual tool. But as we do that, we've got to remember that that communication initially isn't going to last forever. So one of the ways we build and maintain support is by explaining to people exactly what we are doing. And the framework is our tool to do that. It shows how we align to meeting business needs. And it also helps set priorities. And it makes clear what some of the trade-offs are. Of course, we also have to not forget to celebrate as we go through this hard work of implementing and communicating the framework. So the framework gives us a way to brand our effort. It's a way to talk about what value added we're providing to the organization. It gives us a visual tool to do that and to talk about what our function or our department adds to the organization. It can also be a tool for engaging, motivating people about what the vision is for talent development in the organization. We know from some of the research that younger workers are often induced to, or they're attracted to organizations that value talent development. I know this, I was once a corporate recruiter, and when I talked about our company's talent development efforts, people got really excited, and it was something they were not hearing in other conversations with recruiters from other organizations. So it can give us a tool to help us attract talent, develop the talent, and we hope retain the talent. We can use this to celebrate and recognize the efforts of the people who are contributing to this framework. Next slide. So here's another tool that we give you, another handout. Somebody's going to put this in the chat box. Thank you, Angela. And this gives us a tool to clarify how we go about communicating. And remember, two key questions we want to ask is, who needs to know about the effort that we're undertaking, about the change effort or the talent development effort that we are implementing? What kind of information does that stakeholder group care about? What's our purpose in communicating? What do we hope to achieve? And what's the thrust of the central message that we're trying to get across? We need to be more robust in our thinking about communication strategy, because that's what keeps the impetus for the change effort. This implementation of the talent framework is a change effort. And that's what keeps it alive, is reminding people who are going to forget after 5 minutes what we're doing, why we're doing it, what they're getting out of it, all those key questions. We've got to have a continuous communication strategy if we're going to maintain support, particularly from key stakeholder groups. So again, we don't want to forget to celebrate. And we can use the framework as a way to recognize our achievements and acknowledge the contributions of individuals, teams, and groups who've helped make that framework come alive and help us implement it successfully. And then, of course, in our field, we often talk about evaluation, and managers often talk about evaluation. And so we don't want to forget that. Next slide. So in evaluating, we have to consider how to measure the impact. We also want to recalibrate. You know, you probably heard the statistic that 70% of all company change efforts fail to achieve the targeted objectives of the organization. And one reason they fail to achieve the targets is that often we're trying to meet moving targets. And sometimes we forget that. We set the goals, we start to move toward achieving them, and then competitive conditions changed. Who would have predicted 5 years ago that we would have had a pandemic that would have so influenced business results? So we want to have a way to bring up periodically what are the goals of the effort and to revisit that talent development framework on some kind of regular basis to ensure that we are aligning it to the needs of the business, that we're communicating how we're aligning it on a regular basis, and we're able to use that framework as a tool to set priorities and make the stakeholders aware of what we're doing and what impact is coming from that. Now, for evaluation purposes, I took the well-known Kirkpatrick evaluation model, the famous 4 levels. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. The reaction level, how much did people like the effort? Learning, how much did people learn from the effort? Behavior change, how much did people take back to their jobs and apply as a result of participating in some kind of learning experience? What were the measurable results, the productivity gains or the cost savings achieved from the effort? And then Jack Phillips, of course, added return on investment, the well-known ROI, which is sometimes called cost benefit analysis, so that we end up with a 5th level. And there is a 6th level that ATD uncovered in its research, moving toward looking at competencies and capabilities in the field. And we found business impact was that highest level where we relate back the results of our effort to the achievement of the company's strategic goals and the achievement of individual key performance indicators. So I took the famous 4 levels of Kirkpatrick and turned this into a grid so that we can consider, before we launch the effort, what are the expectations for the change to be achieved at each level? What's happening? What are we measuring during that effort? What were the results right after the effort, maybe back on the job if people went to a classroom or to an online experience? And then I'm becoming very interested in that last and 4th box, long after the change. What happens when people get back to the job and start innovating as a result of what they have learned? Notice I don't call these before the learning experience, during the learning experience. Instead, I use the word change because I think this grid may have applications that go beyond talent development, and we can use it to start to look at many different kinds of company change efforts. Next slide. So of course, we have a worksheet to help you with this. And here's an example of a program or product like sponsoring community of practice. Before the change, we had no direct link in our community of practice to our learning and development efforts. During the change, we're measuring changes in motivation and engagement of the people. After the change, what was the percent increase in employee participation? And then long after, we can look at other measures. So you get the basic idea. Now, don't get scared. We don't expect people to fill out that entire grid. If you did that, that's all you would ever do is fill out evaluation grids. That's not the goal here. In fact, we can use that grid as a tool to set priorities on what to evaluate, because evaluation does have a cost. There's no such thing as a free lunch, and evaluation costs money. So we have to evaluate what's worth evaluating relative to our talent development framework. Next slide. So once we've reviewed the evaluations, we use the results of that to revise, rethink, reconsider the programs and products and find recommended changes, ways to improve it, and we can rethink the impact of those efforts. And as we review each component, we can decide whether this is an effort that we want to keep or continue, and whether we would prioritize it as a primary area for our effort or secondary, or whether it's a merely nice to have. And then we have to remember that, again, we have to recalibrate this talent development framework periodically. Some organizations do this on an annual basis. Some of them might pair up this effort with the company's strategic planning efforts so that that linkage is extremely clear to key stakeholders at the top of the organization. And don't forget that turnover can be high even at the senior level. We've all heard the statistic probably that 10,000 people a day in the United States of age 65 are retiring. So we lose a lot of people. And so we have to periodically revisit and re-communicate about our talent development framework. Next slide. So to give you a quick summary, we've done our best to try to show you how a talent development framework based on ATD sponsored research can help you prioritize T&D functions in the organization, revision and rethink what we're trying to achieve, bring about that alignment that's so important between the talent development function and the company's business strategy and business needs. It gives us a way to think about how to launch the effort and use that as a tool to communicate to people about priorities, what we're trying to achieve, and to celebrate our successes. And then ultimately, as we go through the effort, we're evaluating and reconsidering and recalibrating the work. So the framework is never finished. It is always a work in progress because human beings are always works in progress. And so we use this as a way to guide our efforts. So here is, if you want more information about the talent development framework and a research report, research is important. It tells us things, the value, and this technical report gives you the results of a survey of over 1,000 talent development people across many countries. And that full model is shown on the cover there. You see all the components. But remember, this is not take it or leave it. You build your own talent development framework using the puzzle pieces in your own organization. And you use that to involve your key stakeholders in what's important. So we also give you the key link, and you have the QR code that helps link you up to this document online, which you can download for free. Next slide. So thank you, and time to open for questions and answers.
So I've seen quite a few questions coming up in the chat around the whole evaluation and the ROI. What I want to just start that conversation with is, remember, at the very beginning of this talk, we talked about outlining your business outcomes, outlining what your organization cares about and what they think success looks like, and then tying your functions to those business outcomes and building programs aligned within that. And so these conversations you have with your C-suite around what the business outcomes are and how your talent development function supports those outcomes and those goals is baked into this process of prioritization. Because it's not you sitting in talent development thinking, here's what I need to do to be successful workforce-wise. It's you working with the organization's goals saying, how are we going to get where we need to go? And so if you go through this exercise, some of those questions become, how are you partnering to ensure the organization is moving forward and moving in the way it wants to, which is really, really a powerful seat to be sitting in.
Yeah, years ago, I wrote a book, one of my 115. The title was What CEOs Expect from Corporate Training. And it was based on interviews with 78 CEOs. And we took what was then ASTD's competency model, and we converted it into an interview guide, and then got CEOs on the telephone for 15 minutes and compared their views of what talent development should do compared to the ASTD competency model. And it was rather surprising, the results we got, and it illustrated the need for us to do a better job of stakeholder management and stakeholder communication. We got rather disappointing results from that research study. Basically speaking, and you're not going to like to hear what we found out, CEOs thought that the job of talent development was to be the propaganda arm of the CEO suite. And that was a very disappointing view. So it merely dramatized, from my perspective, the need for people in our field to do a better job of involving our stakeholders in that alignment and prioritization process.
We have another question here from the Eastern PA. How can the conjecture be taken out of the equation when looking at talent development efforts and the 6th level business impact? What sort of tangible statistics are used to verify, prove that relationship?
Well, we have to be careful about the word prove. Years ago, I worked with trial attorneys, and they made it clear to me, in looking at the rules of evidence, that there's a big difference between evidence and proof. Proof is in the mind of the beholder. And so, unlike trial attorneys who cannot involve their juries in deciding what evidence needs to be supplied to convince the jury of the guilt or innocence of an individual, we can work with our key stakeholders and involve them in the process of determining what metrics they will find convincing. And often this is what we do when we measure strategic results too. We set targets with a balanced scorecard, and those are measurable, and we can relate or try to relate our talent development efforts, but we've got to involve our stakeholders, because if we present them with it after the fact, they won't buy it.
Another question from Marcus. Marcus Mann asked, as you said, it's often a moving target in an environment that is constantly changing. How can you, with any degree of accuracy, estimate ROI or organizational results?
Somebody else want to field that, or do you want me to keep talking? Well, what we have to do, again, is involve our decision makers in the process. If we get authorization to move forward, I'm still a big believer in the idea of forecasting financial benefits before we invest in a talent development effort. So the way we do that is we capture the metrics as we're getting authorization to launch a learning effort. We've got to involve the stakeholders. What is this problem that we're solving costing us? That's one way we can start to put believable metrics around the costs and benefits, if that's what we're after. But increasingly, we got to be aware that business impact is bigger than ROI. There's a lot of change efforts. Do you really want to go down the path of ROI for equity, diversity, inclusion, and multiculturalism? There's bigger issues than ROI that may mean the success or failure of the business if it's mishandled. So my point is, there's more to measure than just the cash. But if we're going to do that, let's find out the metrics before we spend a lot of time, money, and effort in launching a learning effort. Get the stakeholders involved and get them to declare how they want to measure the success of the effort.
Great. So we're going to pass it back over to PATD soon, but we have one more question. Marcus Mann, you have your hand raised. You want to unmute yourself? You can ask the question.
Yeah, actually I had a couple. I was the one starting off that dive down the road. I come from an accounting and a finance background, and my training has been teaching in that area. So ROI to me has always been a really sketchy area to try to come up with a firm result on. In accounting, you can count something, and you can't really do that with measuring results of training. So I've put my efforts into designing the program well up front and aligning with the corporate goals, mission, and values at the beginning, and then seeing if the behaviors changed at the end, but I never go above level 3. That wasn't my bottom line question, though. I had a question about, my organization had a CEO that was somewhat ambivalent. He would let you run with it, but he didn't really actively support it at all. We had mid-level managers who saw the needs being significantly different than the C-suite saw, and trying to get anything going reminded me of the Jim Collins Good to Great, pushing the flywheel, and it's just one big whopping chunk of steel that doesn't move very fast.
Right.
So, what would you do in a situation where you don't have that kind of support? I've tried some ideas, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a problem that lots of us have faced, Marcus. So thank you for kind of bringing that up. One of the things that I've found that is helpful is kind of creating that shared language around a set of goals that people can agree on. Because if your C-suite and your middle managers aren't speaking the same language and aren't seeing success for the business in the same way, you're never going to be able to please both of those audiences, which is one of the hard jobs of learning and development. We need to obviously have our C-suite be happy with what we're doing, and we need to have our managers feeling supported and happy. And so if you can find ways to open conversations to create some shared language around what the ultimate goals are, you can see some success. But it's a really tough problem when you have that much of a disconnect within an organization that's supposed to be kind of moving in the same direction.
So we want to be cognizant of time. I know that that Zach and Angela probably have some announcements to make also before we end.
Yeah, I
We'd
just
love
want
to
to,
have the conversation with you all. So if you'd like to just send us an email, we'll be more than happy to continue.
we want to thank everyone for being here today. I just want to share with you real quickly. Next month, our presenter is Meredith Priscilla Lammel. She's the professional lecturer at Department of Public Admin and Policy at American University, and has a new book out called 6 Paths to Leadership. In regards to today's session, we did record it for you all, and we will provide anyone who requests the documentation and all the handouts. So certainly reach out to your chapter leadership. And just to close this evening, I want to highlight your chapter's next event. So Eastern Pennsylvania is going to be hosting a regional webinar with Philadelphia and New York and both the New Jersey chapters, as well as Long Island. And that'll be addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion going beyond the benchmarks. Philadelphia has a new member onboarding coming up here on the 21st. And ATD Pittsburgh has a fantastic event in terms of creating a work climate for innovation. So we hope you're able to attend not only the executive education series, but also your chapter's next event. We thank our presenters today. It was absolutely fantastic session. So many great takeaways, and really grateful for everyone's insight. And we do hope you reach out to them for any additional information that may be helpful. Thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all. It was great being with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you from Greater Philadelphia.